Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master. And in today's game, we combine certain ideas from Action Comics number 410, which was the first appearance of the pre crisis Chris Kent, who was the biological son of Superman. And then we also mixed in elements of Action Comics number 844, which was the first appearance of the post-crisis Chris Kent, aka Lor-Zod, the son of Zod and the adopted son of Superman. Often in our game, we take pre-crisis and post-crisis ideas and try to merge them, since our timeline goes back to well before the crisis and then continues on well after the crisis was over. Anyway, so before we get into the game itself, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell for notifications, and as always, leave us a comment. It helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, but more importantly, we just love hearing from you guys. We've got an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So with all that said, let's dive in. The prologue to this one takes place in 1984, when Superman has to go to a base on the moon to make a speech in honor of the 15-year anniversary of the moon landing. Before going to the moon, though, Superman took his son to a park in Metropolis. And just as they're getting ready to leave, a group of androids dressed sort of like Klansmen, honestly, they're wearing dark green robes, and they attack Superman and his son. And these androids also have dark gray skin, and they're armed with what kind of looks like the Jack Kirby version of an electric baton. So one of these attackers says, "Exterminate the child," while another one says, "He and his father must be killed." Superman doesn't want him to lay a finger on his kid, so he grabs Chris and throws him into the air. Then he attacks the men one by one, and they're defeated. The androids, by the way, were created by a mad scientist and were programmed to destroy the entire Superman family. Their strength is incredible, and the cosmic torch gadget that they're all armed with could be fatal even to Superman if they struck him with a high enough dosage. Their creator died years ago, but the androids continue to follow their programming. Superman has destroyed dozens of these things, and he wonders how many more there are still out there. He doesn't know. For now, he just focuses on destroying these androids and their weapons with 30 APs of heat vision. Then he flies up into the air where Chris is, and then the two of them fly to the moon. When Superman and his son arrive on the moon, Chris sees a small NASA lunar base that has recently been built. They go in through an airlock, and Superman begins to shake hands with various astronauts. Chris goes over and he's looking in a glass case similar to the one that Batman keeps Jason Todd's Robin costume in. Superman tells his son he has to go give the speech, but that as soon as it's over, they can go grab a bite to eat for lunch. As soon as the Man of Steel leaves, Chris holds his torso and doubles over in pain. And he says that strange feeling is coming over him again, and everything is getting hazy, like he's in some sort of a trance. Superman, meanwhile, gives his speech to the gathered ladies and gentlemen here, but suddenly the festivities are interrupted when something akin to a reverse meteor shower takes place. Countless shards of super dense rock bust up through the lunar soil, moving straight up at insane speeds. The crowd panics and begins to run when a boulder-sized stone bursts up through the metallic floor of the space station. It keeps moving upwards, slamming into the glass, breaking the ceiling. So using his super speed, Superman seals the holes before anybody is blown out into the vacuum. He sees someone running away on the lunar surface, and he flies over to where they are, and he recognizes that it's Chris. But right now, he has to deal with these rocks. So he flies around, getting a better look at the problem, and these rocks are moving in a straight line, going in through one side of the moon, ripping through it, and then coming out the other side. So Superman decides the easiest solution is to simply push the moon out of the way. So he does. And after the threat has ended, Superman pushes the moon back to where it belongs. And then he and Chris fly back to Earth. They go to Star Labs, where Superman has Chris sit in a chair. He asks him about their trip to the moon, and strangely, Chris doesn't remember going to the moon today. So Superman uses a gadget that shines different colored light in Chris's face. Once the gadget is working on Chris's mind, Superman asks his son why he was outside on the moon. Chris says he wanted to watch the destruction. Superman then asks about an incident earlier with a fountain in the park where someone put chemicals in it that made a cloud of yellow poison gas. And so while under hypnosis, Chris says that he was the one that put the stuff in the fountain. He admits that he sabotaged a NASA flight to Mars in 1981. He caused the San Francisco earthquake of 1982 and the Hoover Dam incident of 1983. So Superman uses his super intelligence and super speed, and he builds this weird metallic gadget. It looks kind of like a retro futuristic bazooka, but made out of like light red colored metal. He points it at Chris, and he activates the gadget. And Chris slumps over to one side while Lor-Zod, the son of General Zod from the Phantom Zone, slumps over in the opposite direction. So they both fall out of the chair, but on different sides. And they are finally separated. Lor-Zod gets to his feet. It admits that it was he who did those things. He was the true menace all along. And now, thanks to that gadget, Lor-Zod can exist as a separate entity in the physical dimension. Superman says he doesn't understand. So Lor-Zod explains that when Zod, Non, and Ursa were running loose on Earth in the 1970s, Zod and Ursa finally conceived a son. Because in the Phantom Zone, the zoners can't touch each other or interact in their insubstantial phantom forms. Then, when they were thwarted on Earth, a pregnant Ursa smuggled a piece of jewel kryptonite back into the Phantom Zone. And jewel kryptonite, for those who don't know, grants a Phantom Zoner several psychic powers, ranging from telekinesis to personality transfer. And as such, Lor-Zod, his parents, and their friend Non all possessed people on Earth. It was a limited way for them to escape their prison sentence. In the case of Lor-Zod, when he was born, he possessed Chris, sort of like an invisible Siamese twin. Lor-Zod says he was always there, right alongside Chris, but Superman just could never see him before now. Lor-Zod further explains that he could temporarily separate from Chris and become solid for short periods of time. And whenever he would do that, the real Chris would fall into a coma, until Lor-Zod returned to his place. And Chris would have no memory of it. So that worked almost like the polar opposite of astral projection. Lor-Zod says that after all this time, now he can finally remain solid permanently without needing Chris anymore. And as long as Lor-Zod is awake, Chris is going to stay in a coma forever. Suddenly, more of those gray-skinned androids burst into the room and attack Lor-Zod with those cosmic torch devices. One yells, "Death to Superman's son," while the other yells, "Exterminate the child." They both hit Lor-Zod at the exact same time, seemingly electrocuting him. Superman attacks them, breaking the androids, but Lor-Zod seems to be dying. As he does, he fades and his body returns to the Phantom Zone. But what about Chris? Superman hurries to his son's side and wakes him up. Chris asks if he's okay, and Superman says he's never been better in his whole life. And that brings us to the main plot of today's game session. With Lor-Zod finally gone, Chris is finally free. But with this victory, a new threat becomes clear. Zod, Non, and Ursa are not in the Phantom Zone. Their minds have possessed 3 people on Earth. So Superman gets to work trying to figure out who they've possessed. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, a man named Avruskin is the human being who is possessed by General Zod. He's from an area of the USSR known as Hokolistan. His parents both worked for the Soviet Union, but were killed by radiation exposure. One day, while he was meditating, he was possessed by Zod. Ursa, by the way, currently possesses a woman named Salu Charny-Rikanova, while Non currently possesses a man named Ivan Nisniakomets. While Lor-Zod and Chris Kent are separated, some of the other Phantom Zoners use that piece of jewel kryptonite that's still in the Phantom Zone to tell Zod that his son just returned to the zone, dead. And General Zod's hatred of Superman reaches an all-time high. Zod had a long-term plan that he was patiently waiting to execute, but now in a rage, he, Non, and Ursa attacked the Fortress of Solitude wearing clunky red power armor. When they do, the supercomputer in the fortress notifies not only Clark Kent, aka Superman Blue, but it also notifies Superman Red, aka John Redbridge, and his wife Power Girl, who used to be known as Supergirl. So while Zod attacks Clark, Superman Red takes on Non, while his wife Power Girl deals with Ursa. While they fight, Chris searches the Fortress of Solitude for anything that might help. In doing so, he finds his dad's old Superboy costume, which actually has a body of 25 and skin armor level 10, which, for those unfamiliar with DC heroes, those are insanely good stats. So Chris puts the costume on, and it comes with an old flight ring that the Legion of Superheroes gave his dad back in the day. Chris manages to activate it, and the voice of a Legionnaire from the 30th century named Brainiac 5 can be heard asking what the emergency is. Chris says, General Zod, Non, and Ursa are attacking, and they have some kind of power armor, and things are looking pretty bad. No sooner than he says this, Legion time machines begin to appear. Brainiac 5 says, "Contacting us was the right thing to do, Superboy." Chris says, "Oh, I think you have me confused with my dad. I'm not Superboy." Saturn Girl says, "We know exactly who you are." And using her telepathy, she shares with him how history remembers him. Meanwhile, Superman tears open Zod's chest plate, only for red sun radiation to pour out. The same thing happens to Power Girl, and both she and Superman lose their powers in presence of red sun radiation. Zod roars at Superman, saying that Kal-El killed his son. Superman says the last thing he would ever do is kill anyone, explaining that it was androids who killed Lor-Zod. Zod yells that he's lying, and he prepares to break Kal-El's neck while he has no powers. Just then, a huge metal fist punches Zod, which gets Zod's attention, and it's the Supermobile, which a lot of people hate and they don't understand when it would ever possibly be useful. This is a awesome example of one of those times. So the Supermobile used its telescoping robot arms to punch General Zod, and it is every bit as strong as Superman is. Zod looks over at the Supermobile, and Superboy is driving it. And of course, when Zod looks at Superboy, he thinks he's looking at his son. So it's this weird mix of shock and betrayal and confusion. And I should also mention that the Supermobile is shielded from red sun radiation. So Zod and Ursa stop for a second and are looking at Superboy, right? And while they're distracted, the Legion of Superheroes floods into the room, each one using a different superpower to fight the Phantom Zoners. Brainiac 5 uses his force fields on Superman, and the red sun radiation cannot pass through Brainy's force fields whatsoever. So Superman and Power Girl get their second wind and keep fighting. And now Zod, Non, and Ursa are vastly outnumbered. Superman Red hits them with the Phantom Zone projector, putting both the Kryptonians themselves in the zone, as well as the humans that they'd possessed. Once they're in the zone, though, it separates the spirits from their victims. Misa Now of the Legion tells Superboy to use the Phantom Zone projector on her, and he hesitates. Brainiac 5 says, "Go ahead, Superboy, it's all right." So Misa is also sent into the Phantom Zone. While Superman says, "Superboy," Brainiac 5 assures Superman that as far as the historical documents are concerned, his son is indeed the Superboy of the 1980s. Misa then teleports back to where everyone is standing in the fortress, and in her hand is that piece of jewel kryptonite that Ursa had smuggled in with her. Misa says the villains won't be possessing anyone or using telekinesis from the zone anytime soon. And the Legion prepares to return to the 30th century to deal with a villain named Glorith. They ask Superboy if he wants to come along, and he asks his dad if it's all right. Superman allows it, and Superboy gets into a time machine with Saturn Girl, who's amused by the little boy's crush on her. And with that, the Legion leaves, which brings us to our epilogue. Kal-El uses the Phantom Zone viewer to check on General Zod, Ursa, and Non. And while doing so, he notices a Kryptonian man named Zaltar, or excuse me, Zaltar, who is holding a small round gadget called the Omega Hedron. Kal-El frees Zaltar from the Phantom Zone, asking him why he was imprisoned to begin with. And Kara, aka Power Girl, knows exactly who Zaltar is and vouches for him. She says that when she was young, Zaltar was basically her art teacher, and the Omega Hedron was used for sculpture, making things like trees and stuff like that. But due to a mistake, Zaltar seemed to have doomed Argo City, and as such, they sent him into the Phantom Zone. Just then, the supercomputer in the Fortress of Solitude receives a message, which it puts on the large view screen. It's a race of aliens asking Superman to come to their galaxy on a diplomatic mission. Superman Red asks his wife where this place is located, and Kara claims it's about 100 trillion miles from here. Superman is hesitant to go, but Power Girl and her husband say they can hold down the fort while he's gone. So he leaves, and Power Girl says she'd like to show Zaltar around Earth. While they're giving Zaltar the grand tour, a beautiful red-haired witch named Selene gets her hands on the Omega Hedron, which has the power reserve power. So when it fuels her own sorcery power, she becomes practically unstoppable. And she's affected by Superman Red's Valentino effect and decides to keep him as her boy toy. Selene also banishes Supergirl and Zoltar to the Phantom Zone to get him out of the way. Selene erects a huge spire that looks kind of like something out of Lord of the Rings, and the Daily Planet covers the story. James Olsen, formerly known as Jimmy Olsen, is 65 years old now, by the way, and he has Perry White's old job. So Jim and his wife Lucy, who's one of the female heroes who've gone by the name Superwoman, get Power Girl and Zoltar out of the Phantom Zone. Together, they all beat Selene, and they recover the Omega Hedron. Zoltar goes to live on New Krypton, where a lot of the people from Argo City live these days. The Omega Hedron is safely away from the Earth, and Selene goes to prison. And that was it for this game session. We enjoyed it on our end. We hope that you did too. If so, as always, we would love it if you took just a quick moment of your time to smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell, and leave us a comment. From all of us at the longest running superhero role-playing game on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.